It's officially game week. The West Virginia football program will travel to Maryland this weekend to open the 2021 season. I'm Jared Sari, staff writer for WVSports.com, and alongside managing editor Keenan Cummings, we're going to talk you through what we're looking for come kickoff. But first, we're chatting with Scott Green, the publisher of the Terrapin Sports Report on the Rivals Network. He's giving us the lowdown on what to expect out of Maryland and who to keep an eye on. Welcome to Musings from the Mountains. Year 3 of the Neil Brown era kicks off this Saturday. The Mountaineers will be hosted by the Maryland Terrapins, an out-of-conference opponent coming off of a 2-3 season. Joining us to talk about the state of the Terps is Scott Green, the publisher of the Terrapin Sports Report on the Rivals Network. Scott, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good. How are you guys doing?
Doing all right. Can't complain. Keenan, you good?
Oh, yeah, you know it. Ready for football season.
Yeah. So I guess to open us up, Scott, could you tell us a little bit about what is the team WVU is going up against this weekend?
Yeah, I mean, obviously they're a team that, I guess had a couple big wins last season. You look at them beating Penn State on the road, and then had that, kind of exciting win over Minnesota at home in overtime. But obviously also had a shortened season, due to COVID, really kind of just ravished their schedule. Ended up only playing 5 games. So, I think they had a very up and down year last year, probably a little more down than up. But they return a lot of starters, a lot of key guys. Most importantly, Tagovailoa's back, quarterback. Really kind of been upgrading the defense and a lot of skills guys like former 5-star Rakim Jarrett. I think this is going to be a talented team, but a team that's still kind of learning how to win.
You mentioned Tagovailoa. What have you seen from him kind of heading out of last season? What have you seen from him in the spring and heading into this year?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we saw a whole lot, during the spring. He was very up and down last year. He was phenomenal against Minnesota and Penn State. Just putting it bluntly, I mean, he was just bad against Northwestern and the other games. So, very up and down, but, he's had a full off season. He's kind of more on the quiet side. He doesn't like to talk a lot. But one thing the coaches have really talked about, and especially, in camp leading up to the opener, is just how much he's improved from a leadership standpoint. When you talk to some of the other players, he's a guy who's, been coordinating, getting together and throwing with some of the receivers. He's done some player only meetings, kind of led the offense that way. So I think having a full off season and, really getting a chance to know his guys better, now that COVID hasn't kind of put as much of a restraint on things. I think he's in line for a big season, and I think you're going to see a lot more from him from a leadership standpoint as well.
Scott, on the field, what does he do well? I know you mentioned the leadership aspect, and obviously that's important. What does he do well in the field, and how does he change their offense? Obviously he can move a little bit, and really kind of as a follow-up to that, what does their offensive line look like? I know that was something that was a concern.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at Tagovailoa, he's a guy that knows how to, I think he's clearly a pass first guy. He's going to look to pass the ball. He's going to go through his progression, go through his reads. But I think with another year in the offense, he's really got a grasp of this playbook. And I think the fact that they brought in Dan Enos, who was with his brother and Loxley at Alabama, I think that's helped tremendously. The verbiage might be a little different, but it's basically keeping things the same and also kind of allowing his brother to kind of help him out a little bit this past off season. But, he's an accurate thrower. He's very good at throwing on the run. He's very good at, knowing when the pocket's breaking down and getting outside of the pocket. And, especially when you talk to guys like the tight ends, I mean, someone like Chiga Okonkwo, the senior tight end, who's, going to be a big part of the offense this year. He just flat out told me, before the season started, in years past, he would just give up on a route and know he was never going to see the ball again. Whereas this year, he's got to continue trying to get open, coming back to the quarterback because he knows at any point the ball is going to come to him. So I think that's really kind of what Tagovailoa brings, on the field. And again, he throws a very accurate deep ball. It's another thing he really brings. As far as the O line, you kind of hit on it. I think that's the biggest concern for this team heading into the opener. They're basically set at both bookend. Um, they've got Spencer Anderson, who's going to play the right tackle spot. The left tackle spots, basically, um, you're looking at a 2-year returning starter there. But the real issue, I think, is going to be on the interior of the line. They brought in a JUCO center, Eric Harris, and I think he's a guy who they were hoping would maybe earn that starting center spot. They've talked continually about how athletic he is, but I just think the jump and level of play. I don't think they feel he's quite ready to start. So you're going to see some different things on the interior of the line. So we'll kind of see what happens there with the O line, but I think they're set at tackle. They've got some experience at the guard spots. But the thing you're going to be looking at now is what you're going to see is Jahari Branch, who was another former JUCO and was previously playing the guard spot, has now been shuffled over to center. And you're looking at a former DeMatha guy, Evan Gregory, who's kind of slid into that right guard spot. So I think they feel good about what they have now, but there's not a ton of depth on that O line. So I think the key is going to be keeping them healthy. And, I think obviously it helps, that Tagovailoa has had another year here under his belt.
Are there any position groups defensively that you have similar concerns about?
Honestly, on the defensive side, believe it or not, one of Maryland's biggest issues over the years has actually been the D line. And from what I hear and what I see, I actually feel pretty good about the D line. They're an older group, experienced group, and they've gotten bigger over the last couple of years. The one position where I think there's a ton of young talent, but it might take them a while to gel or really, see their full potential, at the college level, I think is maybe going to be the linebackers. When you talk about the linebackers, you're looking at a group who's, brought in 2 5-stars, a high 4-star kid from Florida who picked Maryland over Alabama, and Ribbon Hippolyte is going to start inside. These are guys that are extremely talented, but have only maybe started 1 or 2 games in their careers. So it could take those guys a little bit of time to get adjusted. I think especially the inside guys. And then, you also talk about, looking at the linebackers, they're going to run a more of a 3-4 scheme this year. But when you also talk about, the jack, kind of the hybrid linebacker, rush end, you're also looking there. You look at a guy like Damian Robinson, who's a, top 100 type guy who's coming in, and he's just been a force throughout fall camp, and it's looking like he might start there that rush end spot. So that might allow them to maybe move some other guys around at the linebacker position. So we'll see. But if I had to pick a position, I'd probably say linebacker.
Now, I'd be remiss if I didn't bring this up, but Maryland has a couple of former WVU commits defensively: Joseph Boletapelli, Osita Smith, Isaiah Hazel. Do you see any of them being a factor this game or perhaps later on in the season?
Boletepeli, he got a lot of run last year. Just being honest, it seems like maybe he's been passed by some guys this year. I do think he'll be in the 2 deep, but I'm not sure. I'd say maybe from last season, you'll maybe see a possibly a decrease in snaps from what he saw last year. That said, he was injured some of last year, so there were some games he just missed. But when he does play, I think there may be a few younger guys that have maybe passed him. With Aceta Smith, I mean, I know he's a guy they like a lot. They actually just moved him to linebacker. Speaking of that unit, he's a guy who was initially at safety, and they've now moved to linebacker. And from everything I've heard, from the staff, it sounds like they really like his potential at linebacker. That said, I'm not sure how much he'll play this year, but I think he's a guy who, they like moving forward at that spot. I think he's a guy who could play down the line. As far as Isaiah Hazel, not a guy I've heard too much of this preseason. He's a kid who I liked in high school as a DB myself, at Wise High School. Was also a good receiver. Um, so, I think he's got some potential and can see some time. But I think in his case, he's just at a position where, that's one of the top groups on the team. And it's just a matter of fighting for playing time, with some guys ahead of him or just ahead of him already in the pecking order.
Scott, what are the expectations for this Maryland team this year? I mean, and how are people perceiving, what Loxley's been able to do there so far? I know obviously kind of had to build it up a little bit, and he's gotten a lot of talent, but what's the perception like around the program? What are the expectations? Are people expecting this to be a leap forward?
Yeah, I mean, one thing I noticed right off the bat with Loxley, in year 1 and 2 is, he called year one, year point 0.5 or something like that, and he called year two like year 1.5. Basically kind of saying that they got a late start, and they didn't feel great about where things were, and they thought they needed maybe a little more time. But one thing you noticed immediately this year is there was no excuses, no BS. I mean, he's basically come out and said, we feel like we've got the talent now, we've got the guys, we've built the culture, and guys understand what's expected of them. So I think they feel like this is the year that they need to win. Um, I think to really feel good, they need to get to 6 wins and, just get to a bowl game. I feel like year 3 is kind of the year. And when you look at the schedule, don't get me wrong, it's a difficult schedule to be sure, but when you look at who they're playing at home and who they're playing on the road, things really kind of line up for them. They got 7 home games. When you look at the teams that they get on the road, it's, kind of some of the teams that you'd expect to have a chance to beat maybe. So if they can get, an upset or two at home and, beat some lesser teams on the road, maybe, I think 6 is definitely achievable. And I think that's what's expected, pretty much of the program and of the fans at this point moving forward.
Conference realignment obviously has made things a little wacky, altogether with scheduling and traditional rivals and all that stuff. But how are Maryland fans treating this game with West Virginia? Obviously a border war, they've played a lot. Is this a game that gets the Maryland fans juiced up? And kind of what is the atmosphere like? What's the talk like around the program, around the fan base, heading into this week? Because clearly West Virginia in the Big 12 doesn't have a lot of these regional games on the schedule anymore.
Yeah, I mean, when I talk to at least most of my friends or alumni that I know this is a game they always look forward to. I'm sure I don't have to tell you guys there are a lot of WVU grads here in the DMV area. So there's a lot of talk back and forth with friends and family and things like that. So I think this is definitely a game that's anticipated, looked forward to. And like you said, with the realignment, with both teams, I think you don't see a lot of those natural rivalries, like you used to have in the past. And, Maryland and West Virginia played for a long time. And for me, it's kind of hard to believe. I think it's been since 2015, right? Is that correct? Is that the
Yes,
last?
yes, I think you're right, because last year obviously wasn't played.
Right. I mean, it's just kind of crazy to me to think that it's been that long since these teams have played. But I mean, yeah, I think this is absolutely a game Maryland fans look forward to. They want to win. And when you talk to most Maryland fans too, they're going to say, I think they know that West Virginia is maybe kind of coming off a similar season where things maybe didn't go as they would have liked. They feel like they have a pretty good team. And, I think most fans feel like this is, a game that's probably going to be pretty evenly matched. And, a win for either of these teams is kind of going to be a chance to catapult them to hopefully something good. So I think they're really looking forward to this one.
Who is the guy, offense, defense, special teams, that people don't talk about that you think will be a factor this season for Maryland?
Offense, I think that's an easy one. I think it's going to be, I actually already said his name, but Chiga Okonkwo. He's a guy who came up from Atlanta, kind of a smaller tight end, was more of a guy that played out wide in high school. And he missed all of last year with excuse me, how do you say it? Myocarditis? The heart disease.
Oh, yeah, close enough.
Right. The heart disease guys are getting during COVID. He actually turned out he had that, so he missed all of last season. But he's back healthy, bigger than ever, and has really, really, really developed, a good rapport with Tagovailoa. So and basically Maryland was decimated at tight end last year. They essentially didn't have any receiving tight ends, didn't use the tight ends, didn't look at the tight ends. And I mean, that's a huge part of Loxley's offense. And I think bringing Enos in, it becomes an even bigger part of the offense because he really likes to use the tight ends as well. So I think having a Conquo back, who was like the second leading receiver 2 years ago, is going to be huge. And he's shown great rapport on the field with Leah. Kind of leading up to the season. In the spring game, when Leah looked to be in trouble, he was looking for guys like Chig up the seam and hitting them fairly frequently. So I think Okonkwo at tight end is a guy you're really gonna have to look after. And behind him too, they got a guy Corey Dykes from Potomac High School here in Maryland, and he's a guy that was a big time basketball recruit as well as football recruit. And he initially came in as a wide receiver, and they actually moved him to tight end this year, and he's shown a lot of promise as well. So I actually think there are two guys at tight end that they're gonna have to look out for. On defense, again, it's a name I mentioned, but I would say Damian Robinson. He was a high profile recruit, obviously, and plays a position where Maryland struggled the last few years. The pass rush has not been there the last few years for Maryland. But from everything I've heard and seen in camp, I mean, it's looking like he could come in and be a star from day one. Um, Maryland's really lacked a pass rush, and he's a guy who, had something like 50 sacks a senior year of high school, and he brings that size and speed at the end. So I think having him is going to be huge. If I had to pick any other guy on defense that, is maybe not really talked about, it's going to be Sam O. Again, I don't want to mispronounce his last name, so I'm just going to call him Sam O. He's going to play D end, up front in that 3-4. And he's a fifth-year guy who, really isn't talked about much and kind of split time last year. But he's entrenched in that starting DN spot. And from everything I've heard, he's looked really good as well. So I think that fifth-year defensive end up front is going to be good. And then when you talk about the special teams, I'd really looked at the return game. One guy that Loxley's mentions, kind of surprisingly to me, last week is Rakim Jarrett, the former 5-star again. It sounds like he's going to possibly be returning kicks and punts this year. So it sounds like they're trying to get the ball in his hands as much as possible. And also in the return game, another guy who I know they like in the punt game is the Nebraska transfer, Marcus Fleming. I know he's a guy that's, really big time in the punt return game as well. So I think both of them in the kick game are two guys to kind of watch out for, with the ability to really take it to the house.
When you look at this game, Scott, I guess if you put it this way, X has to happen for Maryland to win this game. What are your concerns? What are the things that has to happen? And then also kind of, what are your expectations for this game?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of said it earlier, but my gut says this is going to be a close, hard-fought game. I think both teams are kind of coming off similar 2020 seasons. I feel like both teams, return some talent in different spots of the field. And I think both teams feel good heading into this year, with some big expectations. So my expectation is that this is going to be a close game. I think, just looking at West Virginia and looking at Maryland, I feel like one area where Maryland's really going to have to do well defensively is stopping the run. Obviously, you look at West Virginia's running attack and, they've returned some talented guys there, Letty Brown. So I think Maryland's going to have to be able to stop the run. Offensively, I think they're going to need a balanced attack. Obviously they're going to throw the ball, with the talented group of receivers they have. But they also, have a nice stable of running backs, not a ton of experience there, but they're talented guys. So, I think they're going to have to show that they can be balanced on offense and stop the run defensively. And if they can do those things, they got a chance to win. But, I think it's going to be a close game.
Can you hit us with a score prediction, or is that out of your range?
I feel like I got to research it a bit more before I give you a score, but it could be, something like a 27-24. I'll be a homer and say Maryland, but I feel like that's the kind of game we're going to be looking at with this one. Like I said, obviously I'd want to research it a tad bit more at this point, but I'll say 27-24 Maryland.
All right, I think that's all we've got here. For those of you listening, you guys can find Scott on Twitter at Terrapin Nation, or you can read his coverage of Maryland athletics at maryland.rivals.com. Scott, again, thank you for joining us, and let's hope for a good game on Saturday.
All right, thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
All right, so we just got done talking with Scott Green of Terrapin Sports Report, and now we're back. It's Keenan and I, the musings from the mountains that you know and love. We're going to be talking about what to expect from West Virginia this week, and also a little bit of what Neil Brown, Jarrett Parker, Jordan Leslie, what they were talking about during the press conference this week. Keenan, was there anything that stuck out to you from any of those guys that talked?
Well, I think we'd be remiss to not discuss the depth chart that was released. I know it's a depth chart. Yeah, I know it's the first depth chart of the season. How much stock can you put in it, really? But it gets people talking, and rightfully so. And I think that not a ton of surprises. I mean, I don't think there was anything on there that necessarily blew me away. I mean, when it comes to my projections, they were pretty close. Not 100% accurate, obviously, but Daryl Porter kind of getting the jump over Jackie Matthews at one corner spot. Not necessarily surprising when you consider that Jackie was hurt, a lot in fall camp. But that was one thing that stuck out to me. He still got the OR designation, at right tackle. Neil said today that both those guys were going to play. Both those guys, of course, being Parker Moore and Wyatt Mellon. So you got that going on. I guess the biggest news, probably the biggest news that no one really talked about was, Casey Leggs, your starting field goal kicker. I would say that was kind of a dark horse pick. Between the options, I thought probably Evan Staley would win that job, coming back from a knee injury. But I think it's good for West Virginia that the job was won outright in camp. With consistency, not necessarily giving it to kind of the last man standing, so to say. But
Right.
overall, I think of all the things that happened, that kind of stood out to me the most, and followed closely by what Neil said, about some game time decisions this week. Michael Laughlin at tight end, still kind of monitoring him. Tony Mathis at backup running back, the same Tony Mathis that has received and the utmost amount of praise, throughout this fall camp for how he's played and how the offense hasn't missed the beat when he's in there at running back. Still a game time type of decision for him. They'll see how it goes. And then, of course, Darrell Middleton is not playing, which I don't think's necessarily a huge shock. The coaches have kind of tried to temper his early season impact, just getting there late and trying to get in shape and do everything you need to do to play that position physically. But those were my biggest takeaways. How about you, Jared?
Yeah, I'm going to have to jump on the running back position depth chart with you on that one, because something that I thought was fairly interesting was, Letty Brown's obviously number one. Tony Mathis, obviously number two. There's the talk that Tony Mathis can't go this weekend. We'll know later, obviously. But Justin Johnson is the number three, freshman Justin Johnson. And, leapfrogged Avarius Sparrow. And there's a very real possibility that Justin Johnson is the number two running back this weekend. Everything that we've been hearing out of fall camp is that shouldn't really be much of a shock, especially with Jalen Anderson still nowhere to be found. It's not like Justin Johnson has much more to compete with, but that's just wild to me to think about, hey, we got a bunch of guys involved last year that were freshmen. Justin Johnson will definitely be a factor. And even some more younger guys like Aubrey Burks, second at a free safety position behind Alonzo Adai. Again, not really much of a surprise, but Neil Brown is not scared. He's not afraid to get these freshman players involved. And I think that it speaks a lot about the depth that this team has and really the recruiting efforts of Neil Brown and company. Um, so those are kind of what stuck out to me. Obviously, yeah, it is a depth chart. It could all be thrown out the window come the second snap of the game. So take it with a grain of salt. But who knows what'll happen come Saturday?
Yeah,
Uh,
and I think speaking to your general point, it speaks to where the program has come. In the short time that Neil's been here, you're talking about true freshmen playing. It's a really select list, to start the season. Past couple years, that hasn't been the case. There's been more guys being forced to play in a sense, which that's not what you want. In a perfect world, you'd like to redshirt almost all those guys.
right.
Obviously play them 4 games if you can, but I think that speaks to where the program's at and the development that's occurred. And, you hear the phrase trust the climb a lot. And I know some people are probably sick of hearing it, but, there is some method to the madness. It is a climb. It takes time to build a program from where West Virginia was at, where they want to be. And to me, I looked at it as a positive sign that, when you got that depth chart, you look down at, I was expecting to see maybe Davis Maliger in there or
Yeah, me
Saint
too.
McLeod or, some other guys that have been talked about. And yeah, they'll probably play, they'll probably play on special teams. And of course, they've got 4 games throughout the year. Guys emerge, guys fall back. That's football. But the fact that that thing wasn't littered with those kind of guys tells me that the coaches feel pretty good about the depth they're developing, and they can kind of put the training wheels on those guys and not force them into situations that maybe they're not ready for.
Right, exactly. I'm with you 100%. And it's nice when you look at this depth chart, and it isn't just freshmen. You have a very nice balance here of seniors, juniors, sophomores, and freshmen. I know that when we had media this week, we talked to Alonzo Adai, and he was talking a lot about how his experience helps him this year. I believe he's in his 6th year, if I recall correctly.
Yeah.
So I'm just very intrigued to see how this group really meshes together, especially a guy like Alonzo Adai. He said Aubrey Burks is constantly, I don't want to say bugging him, but he's always in his ear asking him questions, trying to get better. And I'm really excited for hopefully some of these guys, the Alonzo Adais, the Dante Stills, will be able to rub off a little bit on some of these freshmen and these sophomores, and lay down a little bit of a foundation for these coming seasons. But yeah, so I guess switching gears, looking ahead to Saturday, obviously first game action for the Mountaineers since the Liberty Bowl. Jarrett Doege was benched for Austin Kendall. That was the big news of that one. Kendall's gone. Doege has, according to everybody, Doege has improved leaps and bounds over the Doege that we saw in that bowl game. Keenan, I want to ask you, what are some of the storylines, some of the big targets that you keeping your eyes on this Saturday?
I think you hit on it. I mean, I think the number one storyline for this West Virginia team is Doege. We saw him in fall camp. I personally agree with the assessment from what we were able to see. He looked like a different quarterback. He looked more confident. The ball was coming off his hand better. The placement was better. Of course, that's practice, though. Doing it in practice, you expect guys to look good in practice. Will he do it in a game? Will it translate to a game? If West Virginia can get the type of production that it seems like the coaches think they're going to get out of Doege, where does that take this offense? I mean, clearly they can run the football. I know some of the pieces were gone from a year ago, but a lot of it returns. You can even argue it's gotten better in spots, especially up front. So where can this offense go? We all expect the defense to be pretty good this year. Yeah, they lost some guys, but they replaced them with some experienced guys as well. I'm oddly not concerned about the defense, really at all at this point. Of course, I'll say this and they'll go out and lay an egg, but I feel like the guys that they're replacing from the guys they lost are pretty similar, if not better in a lot of areas. I think Tyke Smith was a major loss. You don't replace him.
Right.
Darius Stills, you can't replace a consensus All-American. But you look at the guys that are sliding in there. Scotty Young, he played excellent in the bowl game. He's kind of built for that spot in the defense. Will he be Tyke Smith? That remains to be seen. But we'll have to see kind of, how the defense gels, how it comes together, and how some of these guys like Akeem Mesidor are ready for these new roles. Because if the offense is clicking the way that it possibly could with Jared Dagey at the helm, if he's as good as advertised, if they're able to run the ball with Letty Brown and some of these other backs, the receivers hold on to the ball, man, maybe that eight win number I keep throwing out there really isn't that crazy after all. I wouldn't begin to call it a floor, without watching a snap, but I would say maybe it's not as crazy as I thought it might have been when I first started floating that number out there.
Now, I'm curious. You say you're not concerned about the defense. Um, Maybe I'm just a person who worries a lot, but when you look at this secondary, Scotty Young is arguably new, if you will. Uh, Charles Woods is new. And then you've got guys like Kerry Martin, who sat out last season, Daryl Porter, again, relatively inexperienced. You really only in that secondary have Nick Troy Fortune and Alonzo Adai and Sean Mahone, to his credit, that really have experience at WVU in that secondary. The depth, not much depth, not much depth. You've got bodies there, but not much field experience. We talked to Scott Green earlier, and even going through media availability this week, Jared Parker, Neil Brown, they all expressed some sort of concern in, trying to contain this wide receiver group that Maryland has, led by a former five-star Raheem Jarrett, Dante Demas, Deshaun Jones. How do you see that shaking out? Do you think that is something to worry about, or are you pretty confident in what the Mountaineers have?
Well, I think there's always concerns. It goes back really to what I was saying earlier. Um, I be concerned? Yeah, but for some reason, I have a good feeling about this group. I had a good feeling about last year's group too. Um, will it be as good as last year's group? Maybe not. Does it have to be? Maybe not. If the offense is better, I think it's going to be a difficult matchup. I do. Those guys are new. Some of those guys you mentioned, Charles Woods, Scotty Young, yeah, they're new, but they've played a lot of football at the Power Five or at a high level in the FCS. So it's not necessarily like they're throwing true freshmen in there. And I know transfers don't always work out. I mean, obviously, if they did, that's all people would recruit. But I do feel like the replacements they've got stepping in here can do the job. And we haven't even talked really about Jackie Matthews, who's going to play. He was the starter all throughout the spring at the other corner spot, started in the bowl game. So, yeah, depth is my number one concern in the secondary, especially moving forward. Depth for game one, not as much. I think obviously everybody's going to be fresh. It's a new season. I don't really worry about that as much, but I do, moving forward once you get into the grind of the schedule, because, I've harped on this. Neil Brown's harped on this. Everyone in the program's harped on this. This team plays 11 Power 5 games this year. 11. And I know one of those is Kansas, but so it all counts. 11 Power 5 games. They're one of 4 teams in the country to do that. And you're going to need to bring those guys along. They're going to have to help you at some point. Maybe not against Maryland, but it's got to happen at some point. I do think, to me, opening up on the road against the team that, yeah, they return a lot, but we don't really know a lot about them. Scott was even talking about this. You got new coordinators, a lot of guys, they only played 5 games a year ago, due to COVID. So there's a lot of questions there too. And I think this game has typically been a barometer game, for West Virginia's season. When West Virginia plays Maryland, if they beat Maryland, they usually have a pretty good season. If they don't, they tend to struggle. So I don't think this is any different. These two teams have played 52 times. West Virginia's won 28 of them, 28, 22, and 2, I believe. So the 53rd meeting. I'll be interested to see how things, play out, and really kind of the atmosphere in Bird Stadium. See how it's like there. I haven't been there personally since last time West Virginia played there, which I believe is 2014. So it's been a while. Kind of see how things have changed since they've got, I guess, ingrained into the Big Ten a little bit.
All right, one last question for you before we head into some game predictions. Who is the one guy of the entire roster? Who is the one guy on West Virginia that you think needs to come out here and play incredibly strong, best game they've had in a long time?
Well, the easy answer is Daggy, but I'm not going to go there. I think it's Brandon Yates. West Virginia needs Brandon Yates to be the left tackle that a lot of people in the program think he can. He's had great games and he's really struggled. He has to find a way to find consistency because West Virginia can't keep getting that pressure coming off the edge, and really the right tackle you could throw them in there as well because really when you look at that offensive line last year, some of the biggest struggles were on the edge, and I think if West Virginia is going to get any better throwing the ball and any better really as an offense, it starts there. You need better protection, and then they've got to be able to obviously move the ball up front. So I guess it's kind of cheating, but maybe I'll just take the whole group, the offensive line as a whole.
Yeah, I
I've
don't
been
blame you.
I've been very much under the belief of you've got to show it to me so I believe it, and that's been for the last 2 years now. So I like the makeup of the line. I'd be lying if I said I didn't. I think this is the. I don't think looking like a Power Five line counts for anything, but they do look like one. Now it's time to find out if they can play like one.
Yeah, I would agree 100%. Somebody else that I'm looking forward to looking at is Bryce Ford Wheaton. I mean, this is a wide receiver who, is constantly getting these opportunities as a wide receiver one, wide receiver two, and he hasn't been awful, but he hasn't been, he's 6'3", 220. You expect, a game breaking wide receiver for somebody who runs the way he does at that size. I think, this could be a really big season for Bryce Ford Wheaton among anybody in the wide receiver room. But I think a big game for him might be necessary when you've got a guy like Caden Prather waiting in the wings. We've heard a lot about Prather. He'll be a factor this season. Um, there could be a competition down the line. I don't know, but I think Bryce Ford Wheaton could halt that in its tracks if he goes and shows out against Maryland this weekend. All right, so I
Yeah, on
guess
that, Jared.
yeah, go ahead.
I'm with you on that too. I mean, because something that really stood out to me, talking to Bryce this summer, we had him in one of these interviews, and the year before, very similar. He was a guy that Neil pegged as, possibly it was his time. It didn't happen. But when you ask him about it, he would talk about things, what he had done, try to put himself in a different position. People ask him this year, kind of what's going to be different, and it really stood out to me that he simply said, I don't want to talk about it. I want to show people, and I think that speaks to that maturity, that Neil Brown's been trying to get out of him. And if he can put it together, I mean, you don't make Bruce Feldman's freak list by accident. You're an athletic guy, and if he can put it together, he's always had all the intangibles, but putting it together and it's kind of like I was talking about with Daggy earlier, finding that just semblance of consistency could go a long way for this offense.
Yeah, Bryce has been showing a lot of confidence, in talking with us. Speaking of confidence, switching gears here, how confident are you in your prediction for this weekend? How do you see it playing out?
This is a tough one. It really is. I mean, I think West Virginia is going to win this game, and I think that because I think West Virginia has a chance to win 8 games this year, and if they don't win this game, it's going to be an uphill battle. They've got to win at least 2 of 3 in the non-conference. I think while Maryland's on the road is probably an easier matchup than Virginia Tech, considering what both teams return. Will this be easy? No. There's too many questions on both sides. I I mean, I've been trying to study Maryland pretty much all day today and still walked away kind of feeling like Scott in a sense that there's just a lot of things you don't know about this football team. They have a lot of talent. They've recruited well, but West Virginia's also recruited well of late under Neil Brown. They have this game at home. You always give them 3 points at home. But I think West Virginia is going to find a way to win this game. It's going to be hard fought. It wouldn't surprise me if you see something similar, to that 2011 game, 2014 game where, West Virginia finds a way to get it done, at the end.
Yeah, I've got a side. I guess I'm siding with both you and Scott. I know Scott had mentioned earlier, he said, probably 27-24 Maryland. I'm not really confident in saying that Maryland is going to go out and win this game, but I am confident in saying that I think it will be a close one, whoever wins this one. Um, I just see a lot of strengths on both sides, and with it being the first game of the season, it's just really hard for me to pick a winner that I'm confident in. But hey, at the end of the day, I'll objectively root for West Virginia because it's more fun covering a winning team. So I'll leave it at that. Um, Before we wrap it up here, Keenan, any final thoughts?
I'm just excited for football, man. We'll obviously be making the trip out there to College Park. We'll have a lot of coverage coming on the site. As usual, we're into game week now. So, as you've already seen, some of our game week features are going up. There'll be a lot more throughout the week. So, stay tuned, and we'll have full coverage during and after the game as well. So, come on over if you're not a member to WVSports.com and check out what we got going on.
All right. Yeah, everybody, thank you again for tuning into Musings from the Mountains. We'll come back at you next week with, reaction and our thoughts to whether West Virginia wins or loses at Maryland. Again, we'll be making the trip out there. So, hit us up with song recommendations. But yeah, that's about it. As always, you can follow our content on WVSports.com. And until next time, we'll talk to you soon.